Imagine pulling into your own driveway after a long shift, exhausted, ready to unwind, only to find a furious woman jamming a key into your car door, screaming that it belongs to the neighborhood now. She's the self-appointed HOA enforcer. Everyone fears the one who's fined neighbors into bankruptcy over blade of grass violations. And when her master key fails, she dials 911, demanding you be arrested for stealing your own vehicle. What she doesn't realize is that the man she's accusing is the county sheriff, and he's been quietly documenting every overreach for months. How far can one power-drunk busybody push before everything explodes in her face? Stay with me, because this showdown is about to get brutal. Mark had been the county sheriff for nearly 15 years, a quiet, no-nonsense guy who kept to himself outside of work. After long shifts dealing with real crime, all he wanted was peace. When he got home to Willow Creek Estates, a tidy upscale neighborhood with manicured lawns and uniform mailboxes, he'd bought the house 5 years earlier, drawn to the promise of order and security. After years on the job, the community was governed by an HOA that most residents barely noticed. The rules seemed reasonable enough, and dues kept everything looking sharp. Life there felt easy at first. Mark would pull his unmarked black SUV into the driveway, change out of uniform, and grill steaks on the back patio while listening to the evening quiet. Neighbors waved politely, kids rode bikes, and nobody bothered anyone. That was until Karen moved onto the board. Karen wasn't just any HOA president. She was the type who treated the covenants like sacred law, and herself, as the sole enforcer, armed with a clipboard and an oversized sense of authority, she patrolled the streets, daily measuring grass height and photographing minor infractions. Most people rolled their eyes and paid the small fines to avoid drama. Mark, busy with work, had never crossed her path yet, but something about his driveway parking had caught her attention weeks earlier. Whispers of new vehicle compliance guidelines were starting to circulate, and Karen was determined to make an example of someone. Little did Mark know his quiet evenings were about to be shattered by a woman who believed she held more power than anyone in uniform ever could. It started small, the way these things always do. A bright orange notice taped to Mark's front door one morning. Vehicle violation, immediate compliance required. His black SUV, the one he drove to work every day, was apparently parked 2 inches over the imaginary line where driveway met street. Karen had measured it herself. The notice boasted complete with a grainy photo, time-stamped at 6:47 a.m. The fine, $150 due in 10 days or it would double. Mark sighed, paid it online without comment, and adjusted his parking. He figured that would be the end of it. But Karen had scented blood. 2 weeks later, another notice. This time the SUV's tint was non-compliant with aesthetic guidelines. Never mind that the windows had come that way from the factory, and every third car in Willow Creek had darker tint. Another $200 fine. Then came the complaint about tire marks on the driveway, supposedly staining the concrete. Mark pressure washed the entire slab on, his day-off muscles aching, only to find a new violation the next morning. Washing your driveway without prior HOA approval now violated water conservation rules. $300. The fines were piling up faster than he could track them. Neighbors started avoiding eye contact when he waved. Some quietly confessed that Karen had been targeting anyone who didn't attend her monthly board meetings or volunteer for her committees. One family had moved out entirely after she threatened foreclosure over holiday. Lights left up 3 days past. January 1st. Mark, though, wasn't the type to run. He started keeping a folder, copies of every notice, every email, every photo she sent demanding immediate correction. Karen escalated. She began driving past his house multiple times, a day slowing to a crawl, peering over her steering wheel like a hawk. Once Mark came home to find her standing in his driveway, clipboard in hand, snapping pictures of his garbage cans that had apparently been placed 2 feet left of regulation. When he stepped out to ask what she was doing, she scurried back to her golf cart without a word. But the notices kept coming, each one more petty than the last. Then she discovered the master key. At a board meeting Mark had never been notified about, Karen pushed through an emergency motion, authorizing the HOA to purchase a universal emergency access tool, supposedly for locksmith situations or abandoned vehicles. What she actually bought was a cheap auto Jimmy kit and a set of tri-keys, off the internet, the kind that could pop open older car doors. She bragged about it in the community newsletter. Your board is now equipped to handle any vehicle compliance issue swiftly and decisively. Mark read it at the station during lunch and felt a chill. He'd seen those kits before used by repo men and unfortunately car thieves. He upgraded his SUV's security that weekend, added a steering wheel lock and installed a dash cam that faced both forward and into the driveway. He had a feeling he'd need proof. The harassment grew bolder. Late-night emails demanding he move his car into the garage for neighborhood aesthetic harmony even though half the street parked in driveways. Threats of towing at his expense. One evening he found a fake boot clamped on his tire, a plastic toy one. Karen had apparently bought online complete with a laminated note. Next time it's real. Mark's patience, forged over years of dealing with actual criminals, was wearing thin. Colleagues at the sheriff's office noticed the dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't told anyone yet what was happening. He didn't want to abuse his position, but the folder on his desk was getting thick. Every violation, every threatening letter, every photo of Karen lurking around his property. He started fighting back quietly. Polite emails requesting copies of the specific bylaws she was citing. Questions about where exactly the HOA budget was going because those fines were adding up to thousands now, yet the community pool still hadn't been repaired. Karen responded with longer, angrier letters accusing him of harassment for asking basic questions. The breaking point was coming. Mark could feel it every time he pulled into his driveway and scanned the street for her golf cart. He knew she was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And one Friday night, after an exhausting 12-hour shift dealing with a multi-car pileup, Mark came home bone-tired and saw Karen standing next to his SUV, metal tool in hand, ready to reclaim community property. What happened next would expose just how far she was willing to go and force Mark to decide whether the badge he wore could stay silent any longer. Mark pulled into his driveway that Friday night just after 10 p.m., the weight of a brutal shift still heavy on his shoulders. Street lights cast long shadows across the perfectly trimmed lawns, and the neighborhood was silent except for the metallic scrape that cut through the air like a warning. There she was, Karen, illuminated by his headlights, crouched beside his SUV with a slim metal tool wedged into the driver's side door. In her other hand gleamed a ring of mismatched keys, the so-called master key she'd bragged about in the newsletter. She was prying, twisting, convinced that this vehicle, his personal property, was somehow hers to seize because of unpaid aesthetic fines that now totaled over $6,000. Mark killed the engine and stepped out slowly, heart pounding, with a mix of exhaustion and raw fury he hadn't felt in years. Karen didn't notice him at first, too focused on forcing the lock. When the tool finally snapped inside the mechanism, she straightened up, face twisted in triumph, and reached for her phone. That's when she saw him watching. Her eyes widened for a split second before narrowing into defiance. Without hesitation, she dialed 911, voice shrill and theatrical as she reported an ongoing theft of community property and demanded immediate officers on scene. She described a suspicious man loitering near the vehicle, never once acknowledging that the man was the vehicle's owner, the same resident she'd been tormenting for months. Mark stood motionless as the call connected. He could hear the dispatcher on speaker. "Ma'am, what is your emergency?" Karen launched into her performance, claiming the car had been abandoned in violation of HOA rules and that she, as president, was lawfully repossessing it. She insisted the man approaching was interfering. The dispatcher asked for her location and name. Then came the question that changed everything. "Ma'am, can you describe the interfering individual?" Karen spat out a vague description: tall, dark jacket, clearly up to no good. Mark reached into his pocket, pulled out his sheriff's badge, and held it up under the porch light so the glow caught the gold shield perfectly. In a calm, steady voice that carried across the driveway, he spoke directly into her phone. "This is Sheriff Mark Reynolds, badge number 217. The vehicle in question is mine, registered in my name, parked on my private property. The individual attempting forced entry is the caller. I have the entire incident recorded on my home security system, including prior acts of harassment and property damage." Silence crackled through the speaker. Karen's face drained of color, the phone trembling in her grip as the dispatcher's tone shifted instantly, professional concern now directed at her. In that frozen moment, years of unchecked power crumbled in Karen's eyes. The woman who had terrorized an entire neighborhood with fines and fear now stood exposed to her abuse of authority, broadcast live to county dispatch. What happened when actual deputies arrived and when Mark finally opened the folder he'd been building for months would strip away every illusion she'd ever had about who really held the power here. 2 patrol cars rolled up within minutes, lights flashing softly in the quiet cul-de-sac. The deputies who stepped out knew Mark instantly. One had worked under him for years. Karen's bravado evaporated as they reviewed the dashcam footage. Right there on the scene, her prying the lock, snapping the tool, then falsely reporting a crime while standing on private property. Mark handed over the thick folder he'd carried from the house, months of violation notices, threatening emails and photos of her trespassing. What started as a simple call-out turned into a full investigation. By morning, Karen faced charges for attempted vehicle tampering, filing a false police report, and misuse of HOA funds. The master key kit had been purchased illegally with community dues. The board held an emergency meeting 2 days later. Attendance was record high. With Mark's evidence laid out, the vote was unanimous. Karen was removed as president, banned from any future board position, and ordered to repay every questionable fine she'd ever issued. Most residents, including Mark, got full refunds. The bogus vehicle rules were struck from the covenants overnight. Karen sold her house quietly 6 months later and left Willow Creek for good. Neighbors still talk about the night the sheriff finally spoke up, how one calm voice with undeniable proof toppled a tyrant who'd bullied them for years. Mark's driveway stays exactly as he likes it now. And every time someone new moves in, the story gets retold as a quiet warning. Real power doesn't come from clipboards or fake keys. It comes from standing up, documenting everything, and knowing when to drop the hammer. So if you're dealing with an overreaching HOA or a neighbor drunk on control, start your own folder today, because the moment they cross the line into actual crimes, the game changes forever. What would you have done in Mark's place? Drop your thoughts below. I read everyone.